Good afternoon, everyone. It is 2 o'clock on Thursday, August the 8th, and it's time to call the regular scheduled Budget and Finance Committee meeting for the City of Franklin to order. The first item on the agenda is approval of minutes from the June 13th Finance Committee meeting. Hope everyone's had a chance to read those. Any corrections or deletions? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Move for approval.
Proper motion and a second. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opportunities for fall 2019. Eric, Christine, you are,
She's taken the lead on working on over the last, well, in some ways 2+ years, but going to bring an opportunity to you and get your feedback and guidance as we move forward. So take it away, Christine.
Thank you. I'm going to actually talk in some detail this afternoon about a couple of different bond issues that I believe last summer we did, I think it was the same month last summer, we did a preview refinancing opportunities that were coming up within the next year. And we have actually, in the first part of 2019, refinanced the Build America bonds from 2009. That was the first bond issue that we had discussed together, and the board authorized us to refinance. And today we're going to come back, and we're not actually asking for you to vote today, but we're going to bring you a staff proposal, but also to just overview the market conditions for these two bond issues, one from 2007 and another from 2010, and ask for your feedback and general direction, and then we would come back to the full board in September if the staff proposal is a direction that you wish us to pursue further. So we'll discuss these two issues and why we're asking to do refinance that year. 2007 bond issue. This is an issue that was issued. It was $20 million back in 2007. It was actually issued through the City of Franklin's Public Building Authority. This is a bond issue that carries the full faith and credit of the city, but it was issued through the Public Building Authority. It's the only bond issue of this type that you have outstanding through the PBA. It pays principal beginning in year 2025 and then continues through 2037. The loan holder is PNC Bank, and that loan agreement was effected back in 2014. And those aldermen who were on the board back in 2014 will probably recall that time period. The interest rate is it's an effective rate because it is the baseline interest rate is variable rate. There is a bank loan rate, and we have to take into account that these are different payment streams. But if we decide to stay with this same structure going forward, we will have an effective rate of around 4.17. And of course, that's based on the current market conditions. But there is a effective rate of probably 4.17 if we stay with the current structure. We do have a timing deadline on this 2007 bond issue because there is a mandatory tender date with PNC Bank of December the 11th of 2019. And so there has to be a decision by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. Even if you chose to stay with the current structure, there would have to be action taken to remain in this structure because of the loan tender date of December the 11th. There's also an interest rate swap on this bond issue that is with a German-owned bank. The full name is on your slide, but we refer to them as FMSW by their initials. This is a successor bank to DEPFA, which was the original counterparty on the swap agreement. And in 2014, the DEPFA moved over our agreement to FMSW.
And that 2007 issue was for the police facility, so it was entirely part of that funding.
And we haven't paid any principal on it
That's
since
right.
then.
Right, it's not scheduled till 2025, and that's part of why we're coming to you, is an option to restructure that and move that payment up and that retirement up as well.
There's really two main options for the board to consider at this time. The first option, of course, is maintain the current structure, knowing that we do have to take care of the bank tender for December. If we did maintain this current structure and through a 2037, we do want to point out some considerations for staying the course. Even though it's a bond issue that goes through 2037, another 18 years, it will require future actions because of the mechanics of variable rate loans are not as long as the final maturity date of bond issues. The city typically issues fixed rate debt in which, unless the city chooses to refinance within pretty much just a couple of windows during that time period, there's not a whole lot that the city, other than just monitoring the debt, really has to do, actions taken. That's not the case with variable rate debt. We certainly are seeing that with the bank tender date. Those are typically 5-year agreements. And so for the life of these bonds, we would have to deal with the different actions that are taken in the intermediate time periods. There's also maintaining the risks associated with swaps and also the LIBOR-based variable rate debt. And just to give a little bit more information is that when these bonds were entered into in 2007, the underlying bond indice is the London Interbanking Offering Rate, which is a very common indices for variable rate transactions throughout the world. That LIBOR rate will be going away at the end of 2021. That was a decision of the British government, actually, and all of the debt that is actually carrying that indices as its underlying basis will have to move to another indices. That's something that we did not cause, and certainly there was nothing that we did for that to occur. But if we do decide to maintain the variable rate structure, sometime in 2021, we would have to move and take action to move to whatever the market is saying is the new indice for variable rate debt at that time. And that rate and that structure is not known right now. There have been proposals. The Federal Reserve has made proposals, but exactly what that's going to look like for American governmental debt is not known right now. We also must maintain our current principal structure, first principal in 2025 if we stay in the current structure, because that's tied to the swap agreement with FMSW. That cannot be changed unless we exit the swap. So there's no flexibility to pay the principal earlier if the board had a desire to do so. And also, and final consideration is that in the first option, we would maintain the interest rate swap agreement until 2037, so there would not be any termination costs because we would be keeping that swap in place. Yes, sir.
Would now be maybe a good time just to give us a real high-level overview of maybe why the swap existed in the first place. It was variable debts to potentially, if rates went through the roof, it would cap our interest rate cost some.
That's a good point to make. Certainly back in this time period, that 2007 time period, even a few years earlier, it was a very common practice on certain bond issues that were variable rate, especially that were long, such as this, 30 years. There was a desire to limit liability, limit the exposure to very high interest rates. And these interest rate swaps were designed to, while the effective rate was never the exact rate of the swap, it was meant to limit exposure to very high interest rate environments. And that is something that over time in tax-exempt governmental debt, we don't see a long lingering exposure to high interest rates, but it can always happen, and that is something that a swap is meant to limit that liability to. But it does lock you in to the years in which the principal is scheduled to be paid, as well as the payment stream back to the counterparty is locked in to us as the agreement holder. We also looked at the option at this time of actually refinancing this bond issue. And the goal of the refinancing would be to make this bond issue look a little bit more like bond issues that we would currently do now for the city of Franklin. And of course, we're 12 years down the road. We're in a different interest rate environment, certainly a different economy than we were in 2007, but we certainly have a debt policy that the board has approved, and this committee has looked at several times, even since it was first adopted. And so what we're bringing forth is a structure that looks a little more similar to what you currently do at this time. But in order to achieve that structure, we would need to first terminate the existing swap with FMSW. And we would also then enter into a refinancing of traditional fixed rate debt that would be under the city of Franklin's name. We would not reissue that through the Public Building Authority. It's always has been a general obligation credit of the city, but we do achieve the lowest fixed rates by issuing that under our own name and under our own AAA credit. We would also eliminate the risks associated with the swap. Many of these risks are just out of our control. There's nothing that we can effectively do to make those risks necessarily any different, but they're our risks associated with a swap that are based upon the desires of your counterparty, and certainly we have changed our counterparty once in this 12-year time period. And we also have the risks associated with LIBOR-based variable rate debt, which the end of LIBOR was not foreseen 12 years ago, but we do know in 2 years that that will be occurring. By terminating the swap, we're also able to restructure the principal payment schedule, which may include paying principal earlier than we had originally planned, both beginning to make payments on that amortization, as well as we could end paying, we wouldn't have to necessarily go out as far as 30 years as originally planned. But to have that flexibility, we would need to terminate the swap and restructure. And then finally, we would point out that the Public Building Authority would no longer serve as an active conduit bond issuer for the city. There is nothing that is wrong with that. We still would have a Public Building Authority should there be a need for it. We have that established. But as far as actually having an active Public Building Authority, they only exist right now because we do have one bond issue that they issued on our behalf. We now want to show you some numbers associated with these two scenarios. In the first option of maintaining the current variable rate structure, what we're seeing in the current interest rate environment would give us would have us a bond rate of 4.17%. This is an increase of about 58 basis points over what we currently pay, and that's due to what we anticipate would occur with refinancing with another bank loan. There have been changes in tax law as it relates to banks since 2014, pretty significant ones, and there is an increased cost to banks to offer that same type of loan to governments. We there would not be any sort of cost for terminating the swap because the swap would remain in place, but we would maintain the current principal structure. First principal is 2025 with the final principal in 2037. And going forward, our total debt service for the remaining, and in this case about 18 years on the debt, would be just a little over $30 million. But we do have the two main future considerations for option one that we bring to your attention is that the LIBOR index is going to be going away in 2 years, and that will require action to convert. And we are not able to do anything right now to affect that conversion. The bond market's just not there yet. So the future considerations would be in the short term, we would need to deal with the end of LIBOR. And then the long-term exposure is, in our consideration, is the exposure to our swap counterparty. And that is that's a fundamental risk of a interest rate swap is the financial health as well as the desire of the counterparty to be in an agreement, in this case for another 18 years. For the second option, which is yes, sir.
So, but on option one, if we stayed there, if rates rise, those rates could rise also to 6.17. If it's still variable in that situation, right?
It is, it is a blended rate because we do have the swap rate in
Okay,
place.
so if it went through the roof, the swap could benefit us at that point in time.
It could, one of the risks of this structure is called basis risk, in that there is not a perfect alignment between the LIBOR. It's currently we get paid 63% of LIBOR. There's also the bank rate, which for 5 years would be set, and then we have the swap rate. And of course, whatever percentage we would get paid of whatever the new indices would be up for negotiation in 2 years with the end of LIBOR. So it's really an effective rate, and this is the best that we would know right now. But I will tell you, even though the intention is for all of these floating and fixed rates to lay on top of each other, there is typically a basis point spread. And especially I look at Michael Walters Young, in the budgeting practice, we budget conservatively even when there's a swap in place, because we expect to have some sort of a spread between the swap rate and the effective rate for a variable rate bond issue.
And we have an opportunity right now to get a fixed rate in that 2% range, which is really attractive, and that's why this makes sense, especially right now, to look at where that window is available to us.
You say, well, there's less than a 2% spread, but it could go to 3 or 4.
It could, and we've got good rates right now we want to take advantage of. Yeah.
And it probably, that 4.17 probably won't go down.
Not that.
Wouldn't expect it.
Right.
That would be for the next 5 years. That would
Yeah.
be our indication for at least the next 5 years, depending, and not knowing what would happen in 2 years with the end of the LIBOR indices, because that's part of the payment stream.
And the fact that the fact that we can,
Interest costs, and we would also be able to restructure that to begin paying principal in 2022, about 3 years earlier than planned. By restructuring, we also could repay the debt about 5 years earlier than planned, which would make the life of the 07 bond issue go from 30 years to 25 years. That's closer to the 20 years that this board currently issues new money debt for. We would need to terminate the swap with FMSW, and we do have in this calculation the fair market value of that swap, which is it's a liability on our books. It's an asset to the FMSW, around $4.8 million. That is a calculation based on current interest rates and the payment streams of those future payments that we owe under the current agreement. However, by terminating the swap, we would be able to take advantage of the restructuring and the much lower interest rates under the offering rates at the current time, as well as us changing the structure. We would have no exposure to LIBOR in 2 years. When it goes away, we would not have to do anything with this transaction, and we would not have any exposure to any changes down the road that that the swap counterparty may experience that are out of our control.
Christine, I would assume then that fair market value swap at 4.8 million is your worst case scenario?
It's the full value right now.
Okay.
It certainly interest rates they can change. Right now, the interest rates are very low, and so that makes this fair market value higher. However, that is one point that we're going to be asking for your thoughts on, is that we would like to be able to enter negotiations with our swap counterparty, in which we would negotiate some price that's a little bit under the fair market value. But until we actually went into negotiations, we would we wouldn't know what that price would be. But certainly that is part of the transaction, is asking for permission to negotiate a termination that could be less than fair market value.
And we do have some sense that there's a mutual interest to terminate the swap
with our counterparty. So that's something, one of the things we're going to ask you to do is give us some authority to go and negotiate that. We think this is sort of your baseline, and when we're able to negotiate, we may be able to get something a little better. We're not sure how much, but we'd like to have the authority to go and pursue that.
And Christine, does that, the 29, the total debt service, does that include us paying that 4.8 million on the swap?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
So that number could come down a little bit then.
It
We
could.
hope so.
Yes.
That's the goal.
And we also, in these numbers, we don't take into account that, of course, we currently plan on paying debt service on the 2007 bonds through 2037. If we're able to restructure, there are monies that we had programmed for debt service from 2033 to 2037 that a future board may choose to use for capital funding or some, whether it be, cash funding of a capital project or operating needs or whatever are the needs down the road, but that would open up some capacity, which 13 years away is not really all that long. It sounds like a long time, but we know how in the capital project world, it's not as long as it sounds. Well, certainly this board will be talking about capital projects in that time frame before too many years have passed. So that would give some room for maybe potential capital project funding in the 33 to 37 range. And we'll wrap back up to the two bond issues, but we do want to also present to you an opportunity to refinance a 2010 bond issue. And this bond issue, it will sound similar to the Build America bonds from '09 that we discussed with you earlier this year. The 2010 bonds, they were part of the Recovery Act. You've not seen these types of bonds since 2010, and we may not ever see these types of bonds again. We don't know. But in 2009 and 2010, the Federal Recovery Act authorized some taxable bond issues of tax-exempt eligible projects. It was something to help local governments that had projects that have been considered tax exempt, but the bond market was not. It was in a bad place during those years, and actually, tax exempt rates at that end of the yield curve were high, and they were much higher than most governments, and most governments were having financial issues at that time. And so what the federal government did was set up this program that allowed for this taxable debt to be issued, and the federal government, subject to annual appropriation, would pay the local governments a subsidy that would result in a lower net borrowing cost than could have been affected at that time. And we'll point out that this program has worked for us. It was a good program. However, it is subject to annual appropriation from the federal government of the subsidy. It has been reduced once. It was reduced during the sequestration a few years ago by 5.9%. And there is always the risk that could happen again before these bonds run their course in 2030. We do compare these to tax-exempt rates here at the current time, and there is debt service savings to be achieved by refinancing this into traditional fixed-rate bonds of the city of Franklin. It was issued with original principal of $15,725,000 with principal payments from 24 to 2030. We do have an average coupon of 5.13%, which equates to 2.95% with the subsidy. It does have a higher subsidy than the Build America bond program. They sound pretty similar, but this actually recovery program had a little bit higher subsidy rate. However, given the fairly short nature of this bond issue, we're still able to achieve some pretty significant savings by refinancing, even with an effective rate that's not guaranteed of just shy of 3%. And we do have an opinion from our bond counsel that we could go ahead at the same time as refinancing the 07 bonds, refinance the 2010 bonds into a larger refinancing issue. The considerations for here at the present time, of course, are the description is actually refunding the 2010 bonds into a traditional fixed rate tax exempt debt of the city of Franklin. We would eliminate the risk of future subsidies that, while we have always received some sort of subsidy, there is a risk of if those would continue. We also would be able to restructure that principal payment schedule to go ahead and begin paying principal earlier, the way we just discussed with the 07 bonds, which we can't do unless we refinance. And then we also can lock in these lower fixed rate that we could currently achieve.
Another just note, the 2010 bonds were used for road projects, I think specifically some of the local portion of McEwen 3 and Columbia Avenue. So so it's kind of good to know what it ties to in terms of our projects.
In the current interest rate environment, we believe we forecast that we actually would have a net interest cost of less than 2%. By refinancing, as well as we would go ahead and propose to start paying principal in 2022, a couple years earlier, which would result in debt service savings of closer to about $1.4 million, as well as we would eliminate risk of these future subsidies.
So Christine, the net interest cost is a little bit higher than refinancing the first one. Is that because maybe the upfront cost of paying down that swap, probably the 2.24 to the 1.81 maybe?
Well, we go out a little farther. We actually, on the first bond issue, we go out, there's two reasons for the difference. We go out to 2032, and then we also, if in our worst case scenario, we refinance the entire amount of the swap termination, and while we finance that short term, it must be financed as taxable debt. And so we wanted these numbers to look worst case. We are looking for ways to pay some part of that swap termination with cash, which reduce the part that need to be taxable. But even with having a relatively small amount of the refinancing for the 07 bonds as taxable, we still have an effective interest rate of around 2.24. So that shows you that even short-term taxable rates right now are very low. But of course, we maximize everything that we can in tax exempt.
Christine touched on one thing there too, in terms of there is an opportunity to use some cash to deal with that upfront cost. And we have some opportunities to pair that up. We got Hall income tax revenue in recently, and that beat our budgeted amount by over $1.5 million. That could be a source. And as we look also at how we're coming in on the closeout of the recently completed fiscal year, there's a good chance we're a little better than we had projected. So pooling those together might give us some capacity that could put a pretty good piece of that into what we would pay by cash. And as Christine indicated, that would present some other additional savings than what we're showing today.
And also, by the time, was it 2022, that there will be a change in the amount of money in sales tax that we're
That's right.
giving directly to the schools, so that will come to us.
That will become a
Yes,
general
ma'am.
fund revenue
Yes.
that we don't have today. That's a good point.
And also a 2020 reappraisal.
That's, yeah, in 2
21.
years. It'll hit us in
Is it
fiscal
2021, whatever.
It happens in 21, it'll go into effect for fiscal 22.
Yes.
So, yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've laid out quite a bit of detail to give you a sense of what we've been evaluating as staff, but we do recommend that we refinance and restructure the 2007 and the 2010 bonds, all underneath the City of Franklin's general obligation credit. That credit and our issuer name has been very well received in the market. And certainly we even saw with refinancing the Build America bonds that something that has even just a very small story when we refinance that under our own name and our own credit is very well received. We had 12 bids and on the refinancing, and as well as we had some new money projects in there as well. And certainly this proposal that we have to you now is rather than being a 20-year bond issue that we did fairly recently, earlier this year, would not go past 2032. So it's fairly short as a long-term offering goes. In order to affect that refinancing, we would need to terminate the interest rate swap associated with the 2007 bonds. And we, as a city administrator, Stuckey alluded to, we will need to, we are considering paying some amount of that termination payment from reserves to reduce the amount that would need to be financed. However, we always take that, those costs into consideration when we show you total debt service obligations for the scenarios. We are looking at a reallocation of property tax dollars beginning in fiscal year 2022. What's in this analysis we're showing here is about $1.5 million so that we can begin paying principal earlier and accelerate those two bond issues. The part of the reasoning behind that is to be able to take advantage of the lower interest rates. When we move to fixed rate debt, we have lower interest rates if we pay them off shorter rather than going out longer. And with the sense of that there is support for, especially on the 2007 bonds, paying those off faster than 30 years, that does make sense by moving from a 30-year structure to a 25-year structure. And certainly the last two bullet points are the direction that we have taken, that you do have a preference for paying principal earlier, as well as if there are times that it makes financial sense to shorten a bond issue, and in this case a bond issue that did go out longer than what you would currently issue in today's time. We have to look at financings and many decisions in government based on the era in which the decisions were made, but certainly there is a case at this point to make this 2000 bond issue look a little bit more like debt that you would issue right now.
Any questions or comments?
Comment, I just think this is good planning and really looking and making sure that we're preparing for the next few years. And this is just a creative way for us to proactively. So I'm in support of us moving and giving the administrator, whatever, and you, the authority to move forward with some type of negotiation. Is that what I heard? Okay,
We would-
just my thoughts.
We would negotiate basically what we talked to you today, and as Christine described it, it's a baseline or a worst-case scenario, and to have some authority to negotiate, we might be able to negotiate specifically that termination cost on the 2007 issue. So with that authority, we can go and have those discussions and see if what kind of better deal we can get. We think there's some mutual interest to terminate the swap, and so we'd look to pursue that with your authority.
I would think our taxpayers would appreciate that.
Would you back up one screen? I think, yeah. Anyone want to look at those, and again, those are the points, those are the staff recommendations.
Yeah, no, I would just comment that I appreciate all Christine's analysis. I mean, I think we're probably eliminating a lot of, well, variable risk, variable interest rate risk, the subsidy risk, the LIBOR risk going away, and just because we are in such a low interest rate environment, the opportunity to lock that in at a really low rate. I'm sure our budget director would appreciate some, not having to keep as much reserves for, it's fixed, it's easy. And I also think too, for future boards, eliminating some of the complexity of these two bonds, I think they would appreciate us doing this.
Especially the 2007.
Well, the other thing there's one thing that's really not on there that you should think about. By retiring debt 5 years earlier, you are actually helping and saving some interest costs. You are actually adding some capacity in that 2032 and beyond timeframe. So as we look at the needs of the community long term, that's a nice benefit too, to give you some options you don't have under the current structure.
And any comments?
I think this is a great thing to propose for us, and I definitely think we ought to do the things that have been suggested to us.
Then I would entertain a motion to recommend staff recommendations to the full board, and that would come up, you have a date for that?
First meeting in September, right?
First
We-
meeting in September.
We would propose coming to work session, the first meeting in September, because of course, every refinancing in Tennessee must be approved by the state in advance. We have had conversations with them about these proposals, but we wanted to come through this public meeting, this committee, to see if we had general direction. We'll be ready the next few days to get that filed, and then we should have that approval back in early September to be able to give, to the full board. As you can imagine, there's a lot of moving pieces to the documentation. And so while we've got them fairly well mapped out, we wanted to get a general sense so that we would come to the full board at work session, first meeting in September, and then ask you to consider resolutions the second meeting in September. And then we would move forward to close the transaction by Thanksgiving. If that's agreeable to the committee.
I'll entertain a motion to that effect.
Second.
All in, and this is, again, to recommend to the full board, staff's recommendations.
And we
on
will
the
present it at
refinance.
work session, then the full, just because of the nature of this, probably makes sense to bring to the whole body at work
Yes.
session and then have them vote in September.
All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Item 3, report on the property taxes.
Good afternoon. The Finance Department prepares reports for this committee on a monthly basis. We also prepare it on a quarterly basis, and as Eric said, we'll have the quarterly report, fourth quarter, at your September meeting. Another department that also prepares financial information is our Revenue Management Department that's overseen by Lawrence Sullivan. And what I thought I might do is actually substitute for him this afternoon, his schedule. And if you have the schedule up, I thought there might be 2 or 3 items I could highlight, because when it's prepared, it's based on tax year. So if you see tax year 2018, that actually is fiscal year 2019. So that's how that schedule is laid out. And the thing about the schedule is you'll notice that it's the local assessed portion is now $20 million. And this is now the second year that's been the case. And if you look over to where it says pickups, what that is the state assessed property, like Middle Tennessee Electric. It's the utilities is what that is. And the one thing that I would highlight from this schedule is we used to always say that at the end of the fiscal year, we would have collected 98% of what's been assessed. Well, what we found out with this last tax year is that now has gone from 98% up to now almost 99%. So that's a great situation to be in. Were there any other questions maybe about the report? I know if Lawrence were here, he may have some other items. Lawrence.
He just snuck in. Pay no attention to the man in the back of the room.
It is. It is. I mean, it's actually collected in a pretty quick manner. There's almost always some amount that does seem to stay out there, but to actually have almost 99% at the end of a fiscal year.
Any questions on the property tax report? Item 4, monthly report for August 2019.
On this report, I know a lot of times it happens at the very end of the meeting. And I know that we kind of go through it briefly, but I thought maybe since we might have a little more time at this meeting, I might actually try to highlight a few more items from the schedule. And so if we look at local sales tax Schedule 1, I was looking through it, and for the first 11 months, the best news is we are up 5.9%. And, and that's more than, that we would have necessarily expected, but 5.9% is a good percentage. And one other thing, if you think about it, is you look at the amount of the sales tax. In 2018, there was only one number that was over 3 million. If you look in 2019, 6 of the 11 months have actually been over 3 million. So it's something, that definitely is good news to see. And if you look at December, it was the first month we had expected to be 4 million. And it was the one that we looked at it, and it actually came in under. So if we look at the economy maybe around that time, it actually came in at 3.8, and the previous December had actually been 3.9. So it was one, the expectation was 4 million, but it actually came in slightly lower than that. And maybe the other item that we have on this schedule at the far right is that since April 2018, the city has now contributed $6 million towards school debt service. And we know that that last contribution will be in March of 2021. Did you have a question, Alderman Peterson?
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, this is on the sales tax.
Okay. It's challenging me.
There it is, right there.
This?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So one more month, and
One
it's been a
minute.
strong year,
Yes,
very good year, fiscal year.
exactly.
We were being pretty conservative in the amount that we had projected, because we had projected for a couple of years a little bit more than it turned out to be. But this year, we were very good, and it's turned out that it's going to be even better than.
Yeah,
much
we had effectively settled on a baseline of 4% in fiscal 19. We have ratcheted that down even further to 3.5%. From a slightly higher base, because we did amend the sales tax amount slightly up based upon the good year that we had to close the books in fiscal 19. But that's now a 3.5% increase in fiscal 2020.
Yeah, I think if, Michael, if you'd have made one more trip to the mall in December, we would have made it.
I will have to tell the rest of my family that. And I'm sure that between the
You're
three
giving
of us,
direction
we
to go to the mall more.
oblige.
Yeah.
I'm a little scared what theater would do to the mall with my credit card. But always remember that the 25-year history, year over year, for sales tax growth in this community sits at 3.51%. And that's why we felt comfortable doing 3.5%, not just because we have strong returns in fiscal 19, but we are in the middle of the largest period of economic expansion in our nation's history. At some point, due to the cycle of economics, that will slow slightly. And we just wanted to make sure that we were in a reasonable position over these ensuing 12 months of this fiscal year to make sure that we handled sales tax appropriately.
What can we consider? I know this is population growth, there's more people going to the mall. Is there one specific thing, or is it festivals, or what can we consider this significant increase? So, do people are coming here to buy?
That's a great question.
Anyone?
Over us?
Well, I will give a little bit of comment. We did have one month of the year that had significant increase, and I can't remember which month it was, but we had one month in which the state did a pretty large prior period adjustment that was in our favor. And when we looked back at the pieces of what happened, I believe it was over $200,000 was a prior period adjustments. And so we kind of look at those as one time. Certainly, there are some prior period adjustments that, while they can be fairly small, have gone against our favor. But we did have one month that I think would have been a little extraordinary because of that reason. But as both of my colleagues were alluded to, we kind of shook our heads at December, because we thought, does that foreshadow the second half of the fiscal year?
We were worried
And-
we were gonna have a rough second half.
And we had some we had
the
some
case.
colleagues at other cities and counties in the state that were fairly similar to us, that their December was not very good. A few places were different, but more were similar to us for the month of December. But I don't know of really anyone else who's experienced such a strong year overall. as we have, so we,
Yeah, there's not a single thing that jumps to mind. I mean, you know, we've had the Cool Springs Galleria has you know, reconfigured and added some different things over time. You never know which one of those, and having unique retail is always important. That brings in broader folks from the region that they just can't get where they're at, so they come into our town to get it. And so they've added some of those, but those have been in place for a year or two or three. So I don't know that one of those necessarily jumps out, but it might be, again, I'm speculating, it just might be just the sheer magnitude of those together over time has made it more of a destination. And, you know, strong local economy doesn't hurt either, so.
And local to shop and eat and whatever also help, rather than going into other counties.
Well, and I think it will be interesting to see when we get to December of next year, or February, actually, to learn the December returns, to
Yeah,
see if
that's
this
right.
was a one-off or if it is a to-be structural change with how people and their spending patterns and habits actually follow. December's always been the largest month because it's Christmas, and that's theoretically when people are buying the most gifts. It's easier than ever to buy at any time now. So it would be interesting to see how that plays forward in future years.
And again, I'm just making a comment, I don't have an explanation. More people are ordering online, and I don't know how the sales tax collections, how they work, but I know, but I know that the doorbell rang at my house many times with UPS and somebody else showing up. So when I said something to Michael about going to the mall, a lot of people don't shop that way now. I mean, they shop some that way, but they don't shop that way now.
well, and that will be, we will watch and see the effect of the legislation from the 2019 session.
Yes, that's right.
Mayor Moore spent a considerable amount of effort in supporting what the fairness, the equity for the online sales, and, you know, especially as it relates to brick and mortar, and so there is now legislation in place that should make it more equitable. It's not perfect, and certainly there's jurisdictions throughout the state who believe they're going to be losers, and some think they'll be winners, and we're going to have to just see how that turns out. But there have been recent changes that, especially for a community such as ours that has a sizable population, it appears that, I mean, if I had to give the guess, the cities that are more just retail centers that have very few population will probably not be a winner in that circumstance compared to a place that does have people who live, you know, a sizable population such as Franklin. So we'll certainly be, while it may be difficult to, we will certainly do as much analysis on what information we get in the coming years to see what kind of effect that legislation has for us. But we should see some positive effect from it.
Just to say a couple things, I appreciate what you were saying about even eating out too. We forget that there's sales tax for things like that too. And so we do feel there. But we walk, you know, in the mall a lot, and I get teased because I always look to see how many people have packages that are there.
You just walk it or you purchase it.
I always look at license plates in the parking lot too.
Which is also, you know, you're exactly right,
Yeah.
because it's not just Williamson County
Right.
that we're talking about. We really have a great deal. And also, whenever you think about someplace like Berry Farms, you know, which is much bigger population, and I mean, you know, even just going to the grocery store and everything, we really have a lot of opportunities for people. But truly, we're also very fortunate that from south of us, we're the place. You know, we really are.
And even though sales tax certainly is one of the more volatile sources,
Yes.
keep in mind
9 and 10.
the simple demographics. We have as many people coming into work here as we're sending other places, which means that we're getting their lunchtime sales tax dollars. So it's not just our local population that is contributing.
Any other questions from any committee member on any item that we've covered?
Just to continue with this, to talk about the building permits.
Yeah,
Did you talk
Mr.
about the
Chairman, I can
building?
continue on the other schedules
Yeah.
if,
Yes.
okay.
That's probably the
Yeah.
biggest one. There were
'Cause-
some others,
yeah.
but that's the biggest one.
What I'd like to do maybe on development fees, which is Schedules 2 through 6, is we actually have all 12 months in. And what development fees look like always depend on the timing of development. And if you look at last year, it was a record year. So then now when we have now 2019's results, what do the numbers show us? And if you look at building permits, last year they were 2.3 million. This year they were 1.5, down 34%. And it's the way the year started out and the way it finished. If you look at road impact, 11.6 million. This year, 7.6 million. Essentially, almost $4 million less than last year. City facilities tax, last year was 4.8, this year 2.6, less by 46%. And if you look at county facilities tax, last year right under $1 million, this year right under 800,000, so less by 22%. So when you make that comparison, it looks like, you know, you had less than a year that you would have expected. But if you look at road impact fees at 7.6 million, it actually is the second highest year the city has had. But it's just that the comparison is being made to a record year.
Well, but let me tell you, on building permits themselves,
Yes.
this last year was less than not only 2018, but 2017 and 2016.
Yes.
So we're talking about 3 years where this is lower than the previous 3 years. No, but much less the real big one, as we say, the one that's a record
Exactly.
from last year. But for even the 2 years prior to that, this year was lower than either one of them, too.
Keep in mind that the last budget amendment we made, we lowered that number on page 2, that $2.25 million number, to just north of 1.7 million. So we knew that this was coming.
We
because
did,
We could
we did.
see the trend. So it didn't meet that lowered target, but it's certainly the hit, quote unquote, we have from that lower than result is not as significant as it could have been.
So we have a lot of things that has been approved in the pipeline. When does it get counted? When you actually start the construction or when the construction is
Yeah.
finished? When it's turnkey? When did that happen?
At permit, so when they start to pull their permits to
So just
start
because
construction.
We have approved a lot,
Yeah.
I'm thinking Bear
Yeah.
Farm, for instance, there's
Mhm.
things that still, apartments and things that's out there that has not been finished or.
Sure, yeah,
or
you've got
just
a
now-
number of things.
Just now.
Yeah, it's once
Is-
they start, we get the permit, these types of fees.
Okay.
Permit and impact fees.
Okay.
One thing on the road impact schedule, 2019 was the first year that you actually had collections by the collector areas. So of that 7.6 million, what was the breakdown of those collections? And if you look at arterial, 63% of the collections came from arterial. If you look at collector area 1, 14% of the collections. Collector area 2, 17%. Collector area 3, 5%. And collector area 4, 2%. Would the committee want me to list the areas or that those correspond to? I wrote those down in case that was a
Yes.
question.
I'd like to see them.
Because the collector area 1.
The quadrants, we
The
did
quadrants,
They're-
yeah.
They're not
Yeah.
wards, but yeah.
Because I know that we have it on the schedule, but I know for myself it was helpful. So collector area 1 is north of Murfreesboro Road, 3rd Avenue South, and east of East Main Street, Franklin Road. Collector area 2 is south of Murfreesboro Road, 3rd Avenue South, and east of Columbia Avenue. Collector area 3 is south of New Highway 96 West and west of Fifth Avenue South and Columbia Avenue. And then the last area is north of New Highway 96 West, Fifth Avenue North, Main Street, and west of East Main Street and Franklin Road. So those are the collector
So do it
areas.
clockwise,
Yeah.
one,
Yeah, that's
two,
right.
three.
Mhm.
It's going to be very interesting whenever the census comes in, the 2020 census. I guess we're going to be allotting our wards.
Yeah, we'll have
again.
to modify the wards to equalize the
That's right,
population in each.
that's
So,
right.
so
Yeah,
we expect around 80,000 to be our count, so
Mhm.
you could expect those to be around 20,000
Yeah.
per ward.
yeah.
So we try to do it logically by with neighborhoods too,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
but we need that number to be fairly close to each other.
On Schedule 6, which is state shared fuel taxes, I might mention that we still only have 11 months, but through those 11 months, we're at 4.5%. When we budgeted, we were maybe expecting an increase of 7.5%. So actually less than budget. And the reason is there were actually planned rate increases built into the Improve Act. So it seemed like 7.5 would be reachable, but we just know that when we're looking at it, currently it's only a 4.5% increase, not 7.5%. On the conference center schedule, Schedule 7, the city's half share of profit in 2019 has been over 300,000. Last year it was over 200,000. So it actually has been higher this year. 10 of the 12 months were profit. And June of 2019 was lower than June of 2018 because we've been getting information now from the conference center as to maybe why change. And it turned out that in June of 2019, they had a conference that they didn't have, or they had a conference in 2018 that they didn't have happen in 2019. And maybe the last schedule on grants is there has been, of these active grants, $20 million spent. And of that 20 million, 93% of it has been reimbursed to us. 6% has been requested, and only a small amount, less than 1%, has been spent and not yet been requested by city staff. And if you look at the schedule, there are $40 million of grants that remain available for use. And also, we've been looking at transit just to see kind of what the status of them getting grants has been. And we got notice today that they've now made a request for $800,000 of eligible grant receipts. So in essence, where we had to, in the budget amendments, include a portion possibly for an additional transfer, we're hoping this will help us to either minimize or not necessarily have to have that additional transfer.
And we were advised that those funds should be received by early next week, which really, I mean, where we are in the closeout process, to have them receive those funds by the end of August is preferable, highly preferable on Mike's part. So we, if we do get confirmed early next week, as we were told this morning, that would be a nice way to end the fiscal year for the transit fund.
We've got some budgetary, didn't we, within our budget, provide some transfer to help cover if that didn't happen? Or is
Yeah,
that-
so for the last several years, we have asked your authorization to transfer not to exceed $1 million to the transit fund, which then gives the comptroller the sort of flexibility to do this exact scenario. And so anything that does need to be transferred, he can, and everything else simply stays in the general fund.
Maybe the last comment is at the September meeting, we actually hope to include in the monthly reports an investment report.
And also at that time, our investment advisor, government portfolio, will be here doing their annual report at the same time. And we always committee gets to see one of the folks who staff works with on a monthly basis to invest the city's funds.
Do we need to sit on a monthly or quarterly basis? I'm just,
It would be up to the committee.
Okay.
If monthly is too frequent or if quarterly is sufficient, we could do it on either basis.
I could live with either one.
Yeah, we have the information.
That's it, we have the
It's,
information.
When you want to see it.
Yes.
Scott?
My only one question, and I know I've got to ask a question about the conference center every time. I know these are high-level financials, but when you look at the numbers, our revenue went from 7.4 to 7.8 million, so it went up by 400,000. But the fixed expenses went up from 241 to 641. So I'd love to see some more detail. It just seems odd to me that, revenue goes up 5%, but fixed expenses go up 160%. And again, I just don't know exactly where those numbers are coming from.
And there's sometimes facility expenses that hit at different times too. I don't know. I know we had a
It-
couple replacements that came up.
And it can be, and what is defined as fixed expenses, is fixed expenses one time, or is there some, like you said, in labor, so we'll get with
Let's
them
see
on a
if- yeah, we can
definition
give
of
you-
what fixed expenses.
From about 20 a month to 67,000 a month, so I don't know
Mhm.
what they're including. It may be in the management change under, right?
What happened?
And when was it
Yeah.
that they made the change? in,
November 1st of 18.
See. Okay. See,
Yeah,
would
that
be-
corresponds when these numbers
Mhm.
change, October.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And you're looking at which line?
I was looking at the third line down, the fixed expenses.
fixed
and you can
expense
see,
number,
like, in
okay.
October of 18,
Yeah, I
it
see
jumps
what
to
you're talking about, yeah.
64,000
Mhm.
versus, previous year, it was
And
consistently
it is
around
month by
20.
month. Yeah, I see what you mean.
It's just,
But I know that they did make some changes
Mhm.
whenever they changed ownership. And not surprising.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll check,
Yeah, we can
into that
see about that.
definition of fixed expenses also between,
Yeah.
there have been some, we have been working with them on reconciling the two different systems between the current owner, Chartwell, and what the previous, they had a management company, Davidson. They were different accounting systems, and so we've had pretty much most months since and maybe in the last couple months, not as much, but they have been having to reconcile between how the previous accounting system and the current accounting system, because we certainly wanted them to be ready for the audit, because they did make that change during the middle of the audit season, the accounting year. So we wanted to help them get ready, because the current owners, Chartwell, while they weren't the owner the first few months of the fiscal year, we're going to be responsible for explaining in months that they weren't the owner. So we wanted to help them get ready for that, and it has been somewhat of a process. I would say that's probably happens pretty typically when an ownership change happens. But they did bring their new software in when they took over the conference center and the hotel.
I just noticed that change, but the good thing is, yes, our half is 80,000 higher than last year, so
Yeah.
that's good.
Their profit's higher too.
Last question on that, since we own the conference center, I guess we don't pay ourselves property taxes? How does that work?
On that portion, I'm not sure. I know the hotel pays property taxes.
The
but I'm not
hotel
sure
would
about
pay
the conference center.
The conference center is in the name of
Mhm.
a
City and
government
county. Yeah.
government
Yeah.
entity. So
So we don't pay county or city property taxes on that.
I
Yeah.
would not expect,
Yeah.
because it's
Well,
in the
I mean,
name of government.
Right.
It is in the
Okay.
name of a government.
Any other reports? Any other questions? Then I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Proper motion, is there a second? Second. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. We are adjourned.
Good job on that. Good job.